For Palm Sunday, I thought it would be useful for us to get some historical background and context about what's happening on Palm Sunday. We know that Palm Sunday commemorates Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And I know in our church traditions, we think of it as a celebration and recognition of Jesus as King and Messiah, which is what it truly is. In most churches around the world today, children will be singing, Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. And of course, their parents will be singing along with them. And we do these things envisioning Jesus on a donkey coming into Jerusalem just before Passover. And we picture the crowds around him cheering and spreading their cloaks on the road before him and shedding their cloaks to make a saddle for him on the donkey. Basically, the ancient version of rolling out the red carpet. And we even visualize the crowds waving palm branches like those that are behind me. So as we commemorate Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, I think it's helpful for us to understand the symbolism that's going on during this day in the gospel stories, and what those symbols meant to the Jewish people, and how the Romans also would have understood these symbols. They had been the ruling power in Israel for long enough that they knew what the Jews were doing. They understood the symbols. There were just times they couldn't do anything about it. So we know there was already a stir about Jesus amongst the people, that they had heard about his miracles, they had heard his teaching, and he was blowing people's minds. Many times in the Gospels, it says they were amazed. But Jesus resisted ever explicitly saying that he was the Messiah, even though he never said it himself. The buzz was that he was the new Davidic king in the Davidic line, the Messiah. And people had been expecting the Messiah for hundreds of years. He was the one who would free them from all evil and oppression, starting with the Romans. And they expected the Messiah would wield the power of God in order to bring about God's goodness in the world and stomp out all evil, beginning with this military campaign, for sure, against the Romans. It helps us to realize, too, that the whole point of the Passover festival celebration was to commemorate that the Israelites were freed from Egypt, and also that they were saved from that plague of death that killed the firstborn in Egypt, the firstborns. But they were brought out of bondage by Moses and God. And so during this time, more than any other time, the Jews had freedom on their minds, liberation from oppression, independence. Now, from our viewpoint today, when we read the Gospels, we may not see harsh oppression on the part of the Romans against the Jews, but if we read between the lines, and we also rely on some historical background and the scholars who have studied this time period, it becomes a little more obvious what the oppression was. So, for instance, we do know that the Jews hated tax collectors. These were Jewish persons who were traitors against their own people because they collected taxes for the enemy, for the Romans, who oppressed them. If you think our IRS is bad in the United States and that our taxes are excessive, think about this. Scholars estimate that the lowest tax bracket for Jews under Roman oppression was 80% of their income, 80%. And that people who grew crops, 50% of those crops would go to the Romans, and people who were merchants, 50% of their income also went to the Romans. So all of these funds were supporting the military oppressors. Uh, if you think about it, 80% of your salary, 50% of your crop, and 50% of your mercantile sales going to your enemies, doesn't that sound a lot like slavery? And that's how it felt to the Jewish people. That's why they were so excited when Jesus came along. If in fact he was the Messiah, he would stop this brutal taxation. Things would become prosperous again. They'd no longer be working for the oppressor. But those who had this revolution on their mind, they knew they needed to be careful about it, because the Romans, if they got wind of it, and if they had any evidence of it, would come down hard and fast. They actually had in their living memory a Jewish uprising in 6 AD, where the Jewish people revolted against the Romans, and the Romans pushed back hard, really hard. They actually crucified about 2,000 people, and about 20,000 Jews were sold into slavery. So they feared the Romans and hated the Romans. And when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, let's concentrate on the donkey for a moment. The Jews knew exactly what he was saying without words, that the Messiah was here, because this donkey was a reference, a direct reference to Zechariah 9:9. Let's hear it. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O son of Zion." Let me start again. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous, and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." So when they saw Jesus on a donkey, they immediately knew that this was a silent statement. Your king has arrived. I am the one Zechariah prophesied about. Freedom from oppression is coming. But if Jesus had said that out loud in his own words, it would have been insurrection as far as the Romans were concerned. So Jesus could have been arrested immediately if he had done that. But riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, no problem. You could not be arrested for riding a donkey. But the crowds clearly understood the symbol and got the signal that freedom was coming, the Messiah was here. So why did they throw their cloaks on the donkey's back for Jesus to ride on, and why did they throw the cloaks on the ground in front of the donkey? Well, in Jewish custom and understanding, your cloak with its tassels represented you individually. So when they threw their cloaks under Jesus, they were basically saying, we will follow you no matter where you lead us. Be our commander. We will obey you, and we expect you to lead us against the Romans. So they were pledging their allegiance to him, basically, and putting themselves under his authority. But again, no one could be arrested for doing this, even though it was, under the surface, an act of insurrection and rebellion. It could not be held against them because there was no law against shedding your cloaks. But Jesus knew what they meant, and everyone else knew what they meant, that they were saluting Jesus as their leader. Now, what about the palms on Palm Sunday? Why were they waving palm branches? Well, that was a symbol of Jewish nationalism and independence. Just a few years earlier, in 25 AD, the Jews had convinced the Roman governor that the coins needed to be changed because the traditional religious Jews would not touch the coins if they had Caesar's face on them. And so out of trying to create a more smooth situation, the Roman governor gave in and re-minted coins. And the emblem he put on the coins instead was a palm branch, palms. And so the Jews embraced that as a symbol of their independence and nationalism. And so when they were waving those palm branches, what they were really saying is, Pontius Pilate, go home. Romans, go home. Of course, without saying those words. Now we know what actual words were spoken as Jesus rode on his donkey because Luke recorded them in chapter 19, verses 37 through 38. What the crowds were saying out loud is, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven." So these words combined with the palms, Jesus riding on a donkey, and the cloaks being thrown in front of him were a clear enough message to the religious leaders, for sure, and probably a clear enough message to any Romans who were there, because the Romans had been with the Jews a long time, and they made a point of understanding what the Jews were doing. So they saw that Jesus was being proclaimed as the Messiah, the coming King, although it could not be proved as insurrection. Jesus hadn't spoken it. The people hadn't said it out loud. There was no bearing of arms or any kind of sign of violence, but insurrection was dangerously close. That's why the religious leaders are so anxious about the situation, and they plead with Jesus to silence the crowd. It was a dangerous thing to be exhibiting these symbols and to be cheering those words. The Romans were definitely on alert for insurrection, especially at Passover, because they understood that that observance of Passover, more than any other time of the year, was when Jews had freedom on their minds. Now, the adults in the crowd, they did exercise some caution as the procession got closer to the temple. In most churches this Sunday, children are singing Hosanna, 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 which refers to the Bible passage that talks about the children singing that as they approach the temple area with Jesus riding on the donkey. There's a reason why it's the children singing at that point. The adults have zipped up their lips because there was a Roman garrison housed on the temple grounds, and they knew that the children would not be arrested, could not be arrested. So it was okay for them to cheer, but the parents were being careful. We know that tension was incredibly high on Passover in Jerusalem. The religious leaders, even though they hated the Romans and would have loved to see them go, they were kind of maintainers of the status quo and cooperated with them to try and keep the peace. Neither the religious leaders nor the Romans wanted to ignite revolt, but it was like a powder keg with so many people around. During Passover, the population of Jerusalem usually doubled. So it went from 100,000 people to 200,000 people, and many of those masses supported Jesus. If the Romans arrested Jesus in public sight, in daylight, that could spark and set off an explosion of violence as the people would protest and defend Jesus. So that's why a few days hence, when Judas approaches the religious leaders and says, "I can help you take Jesus into custody under the cloak of night," they're very excited about this, because then they could take Jesus, have him arrested and tried, and maybe executed before daylight, before his supporters woke up from their sleep. So while they were sleeping, they were doing their evil. But that's a story that needs to be continued later this week. I just wanted to give you the context of Palm Sunday. I hope you found this helpful. By the way, all the information in here was gathered from James W. Fleming, who does lectures and teaches at the LaGrange Biblical Antiquities Museum. And you can look him up, James W. Fleming. Thanks to him for this information. Bye-bye.